Look, thank you for your calls on this. We're going to move on now, as it's just been confirmed by the BBC that Gary Lineker will leave his presenting role following the conclusion of this weekend's match of the day. He will not now be part of the BBC's coverage of the 2026 World Cup or the next season's FA Cup coverage. Now, we've been asking you if you're going to be glad to see Gary Lineker leave the BBC. What's your reaction to that news? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Give us a ring. Gary Lineker has shared this statement in the last few moments. He says, "Football has been at the heart of my life for as long as I can remember, both on the pitch and in the studio. I care deeply about the game and about the work I've done with the BBC over many years. As I've said, I would never consciously repost anything anti-Semitic. It goes against everything I stand for. However, I recognise the error and upset that I caused and reiterate how sorry I am. Stepping back now feels like the responsible course of action." Last week, Gary Lineker was forced to apologise after sharing a social media post which contained an anti-Semitic illustration. So do you think this is the right decision, Christian?
Yes, I do, but I don't think we should necessarily get too focused on the sort of specific straw that broke the camel's back, being this Israel-Palestine social media post. I think Gary Lineker has just been flouting BBC rules for far too long. Any other presenter, I think, would have been forced out ages ago. I mean, the years' worth of breaching social media impartiality rules, going back to when he compared the Tories' immigration policy to the Nazis, I think that completely crossed the line.
It wasn't a policy, it was language.
Well, same thing. I think he's comparing certain Conservatives to Nazis.
But he didn't do that either.
Well, he said he compared it to the language of the Germany in the 1930s. He compared
the language, not people or policy.
He can wriggle out of that, but I think we all knew what he meant. And he should have been sacked a long time ago. This latest squalid episode, I think, it just shows he lost all common sense. And actually, at the end of the day, he no longer really cared as much about football as he did about virtue signalling on social media. And if he wants to do that as his full-time job, he's welcome to, but not at the dime of the taxpayer or the BBC licence fee payer.
Ava?
I mean, he was on Match of the Day. So I find it sort of confusing that we can't make this separation between someone's political viewpoints and their on-screen persona. It wasn't as if he was presenting Match of the Day and then sort of, waxing lyrical about what he thought about the government of the day. That's specifically what the BBC paid him to do, and he fulfilled that role. What he does in his personal time, I don't see why that affects the taxpayer. I also just sort of find it rather almost sycophantic. I just find it just sort of mind-numbingly stupid that people would look to him and think he needs to be the pariah of all things political, and you can't make the separation. There's a breadth and wealth of news sources available from the BBC. Go and get your news from there. Don't get it from a sports pundit.
No, but neither of us do work for the BBC, or I don't think, maybe I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think I ever would work for the BBC, specifically because I want the ability to speak freely on issues that I care about. But the problem with Gary, especially with Gary, I think still the highest paid person that the BBC has, his comments outside of work really do reflect on the BBC. And if he's going around saying very politically contentious things, the BBC has to maintain the strict impartiality of the BBC, the fact that anyone can view it.
It's football.
No, but it's not just football. It's the BBC brand that he has tainted.
Who throws the first stone or whatever? Because I'm sure there are plenty sort of more cultural figures that they have now brought in who now work on, say, Radio 1 or might present a show on Radio 6, here, there and everywhere, who actually do work politically. I mean, look, for women, goodness, I've forgotten her name. What was that woman that we didn't like who worked in Sadiq Khan's office?
Amy LeMay.
Amy LeMay worked at the Mayor of London, and she was a DJ on Radio 6.
I found that just as offensive.
But what I'm saying is, where do you draw the line at what can be political or not?
Is it worth, though, clarifying? And Gary Lineker has said this before. Remember that they had a whole review of the rules applying to social media posts. That his defence has always been, and in recent interviews that he gave to the BBC, saying, look, I don't work in news.
No.
He said, I fully appreciate that if you're a news gatherer, you work in current affairs, you work in politics, then your personal opinions are related to your job. He works in sport. He's a presenter of a football programme, and therefore his opinions on things outside of what he's been hired to do shouldn't really matter.
I think his seniority and his fame.
Right. So just because he's so popular and so well
as
paid.
I say, because if he's coming out and saying something in a personal capacity, many people will think, well, he's employed by the BBC, he's their biggest paid star, they must be fine with him having that opinion. If Gary Lineker has a junior producer who goes to, went to Jeremy Corbyn rallies, I don't care about that because their views don't matter. Well, I may have in a previous life.
Yeah.
But I don't care about that. But I think with his seniority, the rules should apply even more strictly.
OK, well, look, don't go anywhere because we're going to be taking your calls, hearing from you after this break. Will you be glad to see Gary Lineker leave the BBC? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, let's get straight into your calls on Gary Lineker. The BBC has confirmed in the last few minutes that he will leave his job after this weekend's match of the day. He's the highest paid presenter at the BBC, but has stepped down after apologising for sharing an anti-Semitic post on social media. Will you be glad to see him go? We can go to your calls now, 0207 862 2222. We can speak to Grace in London. Grace, welcome to the show.
Hi.
What are your thoughts?
I do think that it's actually good for celebrities to use their platforms to raise awareness of really serious situations of suffering in our world. I don't think that people should have to be quiet just because they have positions as presenters. I don't think that he should get paid as much as he does, but that's another issue, I suppose. But what I don't understand is why, if he's motivated solely by humanitarian concern, as he would claim, and I think we absolutely should be hugely concerned about the people suffering in Gaza. It is horrific. But if that's his only motivation, why does he only talk about Gaza? Because the biggest crises in our world right now, actually, in terms of the numbers of people, aren't actually in Gaza. There are more people suffering from horrific conflict and starvation in Sudan and Congo, and no one's talking about them. So if he as a presenter wants to use his platform to elevate situations where people need to get a voice and aren't being heard and are suffering, why is he only talking about the situation that is already being talked about? Why does he not care about other human beings who are really suffering?
I don't know if that's entirely fair, Grace, because he did speak out when there was the World Cup and there was a stadium that was built. Well, are we saying allegedly off of slave labour, or are we just saying it was off the backs of slave labour? And he did speak out about that, and I think Calgie wrote a rather disparaging piece at the time about how he should be taken off the BBC, presumably. Probably. But there's been a number of different conflicts that he's spoken out on. This is not the only one.
OK, Grace, thanks for making that point. Thank you for your call. Anne is in Greater Manchester. Anne, welcome to the show. What are your thoughts?
I'm 84 years of age, and I've always admired Gary Lineker.
Okay.
Over the years, I've watched him on television, and I think he's been a very, very great presenter and a nice, gentle sort of human being. And I remember just before when they got to the final of the World Cup, I don't know a lot about football. I remember his kindness to Gaza, how he treated him when he was so upset that they'd lost the match. I think he's a very kind, caring and gentle man. Thank you.
But are you sad to see him go, Anne?
I am sad to see him go. I do. I am really, really sad to see him go.
OK.
Yes.
And
thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Anne's in Greater Manchester. George is in North Yorkshire. George, are you going to be sad to see him go?
In one way, yes. He was a great footballer and he's an absolutely brilliant presenter. But who decided that he should receive such a vast amount of money to do a present a football show? It's absolutely crazy. And if a guy is a presenter on a football show, he should keep his opinions, political or otherwise, to himself. If he wants to be a politician, let him run for Parliament.
So George, if he feels strongly about certain issues, you think that he, or anybody indeed working for the BBC, should not be able to express them on social media? They should not be allowed to publicly express opinions on world events?
Well, we live in a very snowflake society and people can't say anything without being picked up on it. And I'm sure he didn't think there'd be such a backlash and I'm sure he regrets what he said.
OK. George, thank you.
People from North Yorkshire are just so sensible, aren't they? They really are. Very clever, very articulate.
Where are you from again?
I think in North Yorkshire.
Right, OK, good. No bias then. Elaine's in Ayrshire. Elaine, welcome to the show. What would you like to say, Elaine? Are you going to be sad to see him go?
Yes, as far as football's concerned, yes. Mm-hmm. I think he was a very good presenter. However, I do think it's a very dangerous road to go down to have gagging orders on people just because of the job they do. He didn't say it on the BBC. He's a citizen of this country, and as far as I'm concerned, we fought hard to have free speech. The subject that he was pulled up on, I don't agree with anti-Semitism at all, but I do think that people should be allowed to mention the state of Gaza, what's happening to these poor children, and I think the BBC are equally at fault because they're supposed to be, and I suggest strongly that they're supposed to be neutral on all subjects when presenting the news.
I understand. Look, I don't want to get dragged into the BBC's response to world events, but I hear the point that you're making. Now, look, Gary Lineker has released a video statement, and we can have a look at that now.
Hi everyone, some personal news. Last week I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like once again to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent. I know that. I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether and not do next season's FA Cup or World Cup.
Well, there you go. What do you make of his statement, Ava?
I think that's really sad, isn't it? I think that, there's a lot I could say. I think it's a huge loss to the BBC. I think that is an error, and we have to take that as at face value. He has apologised for this, what is it, a rat that appeared on the Instagram story?
He made it. You mean the mistake that he's made? Yes.
He made an error, and I think it's a real shame because he's a huge talent, and I think that's a massive loss to the BBC. We really have to separate sort of church and state when it comes to the politics of the BBC versus all of their other content. And I just think sort of holding people to these high standards of what is essentially a blasphemy law, I think that is quite dangerous.
Do you think...